Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. My name is Michelle Douglas. I'm the Executive Director of the LGBT Purge Fund. It's my honor to have this occasion to join you all today. Today is a very special day. I'd like to start first by telling you a little bit about my story. I wanted to serve Canada in the Canadian Armed Forces as my life's career, my work. And I was so proud to join the Canadian Armed Forces in 1986. I was a young woman, ready to go, start my first full-time job. And I was really good at what I was doing. I was thriving in the Canadian Armed Forces, being a top candidate in all that I did. But unfortunately, in the mid-1980s, I soon came to realize that there was a very serious problem in the military, and that was a codified or written down policy that discriminated against the service of LGBT people serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. That's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people. And despite my service career going so well, I also had the beautiful experience of falling in love with a fellow officer for the first time, and she was amazing. I now realize I had a big problem with my service. And ultimately, because of the military's policy of discrimination, I experienced many interrogations, degrading interrogations, humiliating interrogations that went on often for days in hotel rooms and being attached to a polygraph exam to test whether or not I am a lesbian. After denying that I am, eventually the pressure became too great, and I told the military that I am gay. And it ultimately led to my dismissal from the Canadian Armed Forces. I was a top candidate in the military. I was on a path to real success there, and I was so proud to serve my country. But unfortunately, the military fired me with these words. They said that I was not advantageously employable due to homosexuality. I couldn't believe that despite how I was doing in the military, that I would be fired on this basis. Public service was important to me and to my family. My father had been a career public servant, and it was kind of the family business. And now I was thrown out by the military. I was shocked, really, to have gone through this experience. I didn't know that this was happening in the military. But what I learned at that time, shortly after being fired in 1989, was the reality that I was part of a much bigger systemic type of sweeping discrimination that affected thousands of people. This is what we call the LGBT purge. From the 1950s to the 1990s, Canada had this policy of overt discrimination against LGBT people. And I now have come to realize that more than 9,000 Canadians, dedicated Canadians, those prepared to serve in the RCMP, Canadian Armed Forces, and Federal Public Service, were humiliated and harassed, fired, sometimes criminalized, sometimes institutionalized, but always degraded by this policy. The LGBT purge was a shameful period in Canadian history. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights describes the LGBT purge as one of the longest running and largest scale violations of the human rights of any workforce in Canadian history. And people don't know about it. Not enough people know about it. And that's one of the reasons we're here today. Today is also a special day because it marks the exact day, the 30th anniversary today, of the lawsuit that I brought against the Canadian Armed Forces and the Government of Canada that formally ended the Canadians' ban on the service of LGBT people serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. So for me today, it's a very special day. It's one of remembrance, reflection, celebration, remembering those who came before and didn't have the kind of outcome that I did in my lawsuit. But in 1992, when I was successful, justice for one person is not really justice at all. We know there were thousands of other people, and it took the courage of many others over decades to continue the advocacy, to change the laws and policies, to have a policy in Canada that allowed people to just serve their country and be their authentic selves, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. And mercifully, we are on that path to big change. Now I'd like to introduce two colleagues that I'm working with on this journey that will talk to you about how we've taken the time from 1992, when I had some justice, to a much bigger time when many others finally got acknowledgement, reconciliation, and some compensation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Martine Roy. Martine.
Bonjour, merci. Alors, merci beaucoup de nous avoir ici aujourd'hui pour présenter justement, je pense que Michel elle en a parlé. Qu'est-ce que Michel a fait à 30 ans? C'est quelque chose de très important, c'est changer une politique. Mais quand on change une politique, on ne change pas la culture nécessairement. Et quand elle a changé cette politique puis qu'on l'a enlevée, personne n'en a parlé, personne s'est excusé ou a réparé. Alors, l'idée là-dedans, c'est que pour moi, quand j'étais un soldat à 20 ans, de me faire congédier pour mon orientation sexuelle, ça a complètement déformé ma vision de la vie et du gouvernement et de mon pays. Et ça m'a pris beaucoup, beaucoup de temps avant de me trouver puis d'être capable de retrouver la fierté en moi, mon estime de moi. Ça l'avait vraiment abîmé toute confiance que j'avais bâtie. Et d'avoir fait le recours collectif avec Wayne et Alida, avec le lead de Doug Elliott, qui a été résolu en 11 mois, démontrait vraiment que, bon, il y avait une résolution, puis qu'il y a on veut changer les choses. Mais pour nous, qu'est-ce qui est important? C'est sûr que c'est important d'avoir des excuses, c'est important d'avoir une réparation, mais aussi, qu'est-ce qui est important, c'est les gens aujourd'hui. Qu'est-ce qui se passe avec les gens qui travaillent au fédéral aujourd'hui, dans l'armée, dans la fonction publique, dans la GRC? Et pour nous, c'était important de faire avec le fonds une recherche pour regarder qu'est-ce qui se passait dans tous les départements du fédéral, puis après ça, faire des recommandations, faire un cadeau à tous nos citoyens canadiens, puis dire, regardez, nous, on a appris ceci, on veut vous aider, puis on veut changer la culture dans le milieu du travail au Canada. On veut justement que ça soit inclusif puis que tout le monde puisse être authentique parce que tout le monde va être capable de travailler, être concentré, être focusé puis être authentique. Alors, pour nous, c'était important de faire ce cadeau-là. On a fait cette recherche-là avec C'est Égal et la Fondation Émergence et Optimus qui ont monté ça. Ils ont fait 23 recommandations. C'est important pour nous que ces 23 recommandations soient prises en considération puis qu'on travaille tous ensemble pour changer cette culture-là. Parce que je pense qu'avec Michel qui a changé la politique, nous qui avons réussi à vous, premièrement, vous informer, vous sensibiliser à ce qui s'est passé. Maintenant, c'est le temps de continuer. Alors, on a un rapport qui est très important et je pense qu'aujourd'hui, on vient encore le ramener parce qu'on l'avait déjà sorti en 2022. On vous demande, s'il vous plaît, allez chercher le rapport, amenez ça dans vos lieux de travail et aidez-nous à changer la culture sur le milieu du travail canadien. Merci.
Good morning. My name is Douglas Elliott. I was the lead lawyer in the LGBT Purge class action. I've been a gay activist actually longer than I've been a lawyer, about 45 years now. It's been a long struggle. We have made considerable progress thanks to wonderful, what I call accidental activists like Michel and Martine and Todd Ross, who's here today, Alida Satalik, people who didn't choose to be LGBT rights activists, but because they were victims of horrific discrimination by the federal government, they felt the need to stand up for their rights and the rights of others, and they have made Canada a better country. The Douglas case was a pivotal case in 1992. It marked the first great victory. We started suing in 1985 after the Charter of Rights came in, but a lot of the early cases we lost under Section 1. The courts would repeatedly say, yes, it's discrimination, but the government is justified in discriminating against this group. This was the argument that was made in 1992, that the discrimination, especially in the military and the RCMP, was justified because LGBT people were seen as a threat to national security because they had a so-called personality weakness. They were characterized as people who were susceptible to blackmail and people who would not make good public servants. I've called the LGBT Purge policy a system of bigotry and oppression infused with stereotypes and built on a foundation of lies. In fact, during this period of time, as the Prime Minister acknowledged in his famous apology 5 years ago, no member of the LGBT country betrayed Canada, but Canada betrayed them. It was the longest, most expensive, and the least successful RCMP investigation in Canadian history, a classic witch hunt that during 50 years never produced a single prosecution, let alone a conviction for betraying Canada. A complete waste of resources, and it caused enormous damage to Canadian lives. At one time, we now know through the work of the LGBT Purge Fund that the RCMP had files on over 30,000 Canadians because they conducted surveillance on the LGBT community to try to intercept LGBT people before they came to work for the federal government. Michelle's case was historic, both in ending the most vicious and destructive workplace discrimination policy, but it also set the tone for future victories. After the Michelle Douglas victory in 1992, we never looked back. I will also say that it made a firm foundation for the class action. Some people say, why didn't Michelle do a class action in 1992? I can answer that question as a lawyer very quickly because they didn't exist. Her lawyers didn't have that tool in the toolkit at the time. But when I met with Martine Roy back in 2016 at the Chateau Laurier, I had the good fortune to be having lunch with my old friend Michelle Douglas on one side and my new friend Martine Roy on the other side. And Martine said to me that she had been looking for a lawyer because the people who had been injured like her had never gotten justice, that the Douglas case gave justice to Michelle and changed it for the future. But the people who are victims from this historic injustice in the past did not get compensation. And she asked me her famous question, do you think we can do something? And I said, yes, I think we can do something. Working with a great team of lawyers and, of course, wonderful clients, we achieved a settlement in 11 months. It's just record time, I think, for a class action of that size. And it was eventually approved by the federal court, total amount of $145 million. It's the largest settlement for LGBT rights anywhere in the world, something that Canadians can be proud of. It's a shame, as Michelle said, that we had this policy, but we can take pride in the fact that we took action to resolve it. But there's more work to be done. The LGBT Purge Fund is doing important work using this money that really represents blood money. I want you to understand that. The money that is in the LGBT Purge Fund for these community projects, why is it there? It's because the lawyers and the plaintiffs realize that under our law, there could be no compensation for those thousands of victims of the purge who died before the settlement was achieved, and we felt the government owed a collective compensation to our community because of this. So the money that is going to the monument that's going to be built in Ottawa, to the Museum for Human Rights Project in Winnipeg, and for this wonderful report emerging from the purge, all of that is blood money. It represents the pain and suffering of thousands of Canadians who were victims of the purge, who never lived to see justice. But we're now trying to get justice for them today by improving the lives of LGBT Canadians. We're really delighted to see that in the government's 2S LGBTQI plus action plan, they have now committed to implementing these 23 recommendations. You'll find it ironic coming from a lawyer, but I will say talk is cheap. We want to see action. We have a commitment from the Prime Minister and from Minister Ian to see this implemented, but it's going to be hard work to see it implemented, especially in certain sectors of the federal civil service. And I'm going to call out the RCMP right now. The RCMP was the driving force behind the purge. If you look at the historical records, they fought tooth and nail to persecute LGBT people for 40 years. When the end of the policy came in 1992, the RCMP argued strenuously to Prime Minister Mulroney that the policy should continue. I believe that there is a need for a deep cultural change at the RCMP. You will see in this report, they are the weak link in the federal chain. Commissioner Lucky and her team need to commit to deep cultural change because, as Michelle noted, she just changed the official policy. She did not change the culture. And the culture at the RCMP did not change. And I dare say it has not changed just to the present day, because there has never been a serious effort to change that culture. That's what we need. We don't need sweet words, we need action, and we need real change. Canadians deserve it. Otherwise, the legacy of the LGBT purge will live on forever. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Je peux prendre des questions en français, par exemple. OK?
So we'll start with questions in the room. Nous allons commencer avec les questions dans la salle. Ceux qui se joignent à nous via Zoom, utilisez la fonction lever la main pour nous aviser de votre question. If you're joining via Zoom, please use the raise hand function to notify us of your question. Inès?
Bonjour, Inès Lombardo de Franco Presse. Vous disiez que vous souhaitiez voir de l'action. Vous avez 23 recommandations dans un rapport. Sur quoi exactement vous voulez que ça débouche? Est-ce que vous demandez au gouvernement Trudeau un projet de loi? C'est quoi le débouché de ce que vous voulez?
C'est des recommandations très simples, vraiment. C'est vraiment, tu sais, c'est former un regroupement d'employés de LGBTQ, c'est avoir des politiques d'inclusion et de diversité, c'est avoir des cours de sensibilisation et d'éducation pour tous les membres par rapport à toutes les communautés, c'est supporter justement des organismes à but non lucratif qui peuvent aider. Et je vais laisser aussi Douglas en rajouter, mais c'est vraiment pas changer des lois, non, c'est vraiment appliquer des politiques en emploi.
Je suis complètement d'accord. Ce n'est pas question de projet de loi, c'est question de dépenses. Et si vous regardez ce rapport-là, vous allez voir que les lois et les politiques sont assez bonnes. Le problème, c'est que le travail de tous les jours, c'est le travail des bénévoles, des personnes 2S, LGBTQI+, c'est notre travail à nous en tant que bénévoles. Donc, l'égalité, ce n'est pas gratuite. Il faut, si vous dites, moi, je soutiens cette politique-là, mais ça coûte quelque chose. Il faut dépenser, il faut soutenir d'une manière importante cet effort. À mon avis, c'est une dette à payer de la part du gouvernement. On a fait ce rapport comme un cadeau, comme Martine a dit, mais ça ne veut pas dire que nous autres, on devrait réparer tous ces problèmes-là. c'est le gouvernement du Canada qui devrait le faire. Et je peux ajouter aussi les syndicats, hein, parce que pendant ce temps-là, il n'y avait jamais un syndicaliste qui a dit « Oh non, fais pas ça ». Jamais. Pas un mot contre ça. Donc, les syndicats devraient demander pour leurs membres que le gouvernement fait des dépenses assez importantes pour soutenir ces efforts-là.
Merci. Il y a eu un plan d'action fédéral du gouvernement Trudeau, fin août, je crois, et c'était 100 millions sur 5 ans. Selon des petits organismes, ils ne savent même pas s'ils peuvent en bénéficier et il n'y a que les gros organismes qui ont été consultés en amont. Alors, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce plan? Est-ce que 100 millions, c'est suffisant dans un premier temps? Et comment est-ce que vous réagissez à ce plan, globalement?
Moi, je pense que tout est suffisant. OK? Quand c'est un bon montant d'argent, c'est sûr. Je suis sûre que le plan, c'est pas nous qui l'a présenté, c'est vraiment le secrétariat et Wage. C'est le premier plan d'action. Alors déjà là, c'est quelque chose que je trouve de vraiment incroyable. C'est sûr que c'est pas facile de donner aux plus petits, mais je sais qu'il y a Enchanté Network qui reçoit, qui va distribuer à des plus petits organismes. Et je pense aussi que c'est un début. Hein? C'est un début à quelque chose qui, justement, on avait un plan comme ça qu'on a eu au Québec avec le bureau de lutte à l'homophobie et tout ça qui avait été fait. Alors, je pense que c'est une belle suite qui est faite au fédéral. Et aussi, si vous avez remarqué, il y a le fonds de la purge qui est à l'intérieur du plan pour voir les choses qu'on pourrait faire pour justement mettre ça dans notre passé.
Good morning, Stephen Jeffrey from the Lobby Monitor. In the press release, it did mention that there was a national tour proceeding this day on the Hill, educating people about the LGBT purge and its effects. What did you hear from folks during that tour in terms of the understanding of the purge?
For the last month, I've been traveling across the country. I've been to about 6 cities and had the occasion to meet with people who came to learn about this period of history. I am still surprised at the level of the lack of awareness about such a profound period in Canadian history. So we consider it our work really now to continue the education, to help people understand that this really happened. We're doing important things like taking oral histories and sharing those. There's a great documentary called The Fruit Machine, which kind of tells about the government's efforts to find people they considered homosexuals and then fire them. The other thing we're doing is collecting the historical documents from the government to tell the stories, to make that publicly available. We think that if you don't have the public record available to people, they underestimate what really happened. And then they may deny what happened, and then they'll certainly forget it. So this is the work of our education campaign and even talking to members of parliament. There is an awareness of it, but I don't think the average Canadians know how badly the government hurt so many people who were trying to serve their country. There's lifelong scars here for many. For those who served in the Canadian Armed Forces, many of us have now been deemed to be veterans, which has helped enormously get the service and the support. And then there's the informal stuff that's happening as well, like peer support and just a collective of people coming together saying, I went through that too. I had no idea there was anyone else. So telling our stories is really the most important thing we're doing now across the country.
And that might help answer my next question, which is about the day on the Hill today. What sort of strategies are you planning to employ to make sure that the parliamentarians listen and hear the urgency in needing to adopt these recommendations?
Well, we have a number of people with a lot of lived experience talking to members of parliament, talking to senators, meeting with them, talking to the Prime Minister. Telling our personal stories as a reminder but then taking action squarely on things like the implementation of the recommendations in the report called Emerging from the Purge, au lendemain de la purge, and telling them that to serve Canadians better, we can really help make more inclusive, diverse, welcoming environments. It's quite easy for the government to take up these recommendations, we believe, to implement them, to resource them, and to care and nurture them. They'll have a better workforce, more engaged, more their authentic selves. And that's all really in the order of trying to serve Canadians all the better. That's a big motivator for us.
And we'll take questions online now. Rachel, go ahead.
Sorry.
Rachel, are you on mute? Rachel, I see you're on mute.
Okay, I think I fixed it on my end.
Yes, we can hear you now.
One of these days we'll figure out Zoom. Thank you for taking our questions. I just wanted to ask if to date the federal government has made progress on any of the recommendations. Do you have a sense of there being any progress from them so far?
We've been working with a number of government departments, including the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence. We know that they're doing a lot of hard work and have invited us in for that conversation. So we believe that they're making a serious, sincere effort. We know how far they have to go on this. And so we are pleased to see that they're making these kind of efforts. And a number of government departments have talked to us about their intentions towards implementation. Some have implemented a few of them, but I think we're looking for a reminder today to all government ministers and departments generally to go back and have a look at this report. Have a look at these very sensible, clear recommendations and challenge themselves to take this moment and get busy on those recommendations. It does take resources to do some of this, but we believe this is the kind of investment that if you actually want a diverse, inclusive workplace, as certainly would be suggestive of our most important Canadian values, this is exactly the kind of gift and roadmap for government departments to follow. Some are on the path. We'd like to see more jumping into this report and taking action.
Right, and so I saw that you had a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday. I'm sure you brought these points up with him. What was that conversation like, and did you get any commitment from the Prime Minister that more will be done?
Yes, absolutely. He had a great meeting with us. A number of activists from across Canada joined that meeting. And we talked about the experience of the purge. We talked about the national apology and the commitment in the action plan to implement the Emerging from the Purge report. He expressed commitment towards that, as did Minister Martine, who also attended the meeting. So we also told them that for all of us who have kind of committed towards serving as activists, or whether we were public servants, members of the military, or RCMP, service is actually a very big motivator for many. It certainly is for me. And we said, like, we'll be here with you on this journey. And I think he really welcomed that. We'd like to be part of the conversation. So he did also commit to engaging in that way. So yeah, it was an important meeting for us to reflect also on 5 years since that apology that many of us attended. And I think it was part of our healing journey.
And this concludes the press conference. Ceci me fait la conférence de presse. Merci.